Is former U.S. President Donald Trump going to be indicted in a mass shooting at a school in Tennessee? Hello, I'm Mike Walter, filling in for Anna Naidu, and this is The Heat. A grand jury in New York hearing evidence into a hush money investigation involving former U.S. President Donald Trump and alleged payments to a porn star could indict him soon. Meanwhile, Trump continues to lash out at what he calls a politically motivated witch hunt. But the prospect that he will become the first former American president to be charged remains very high. And the U.S. has been rocked yet again by another mass shooting, this time at a school in Nashville, Tennessee, where 3 9-year-old children and 3 adults were killed. President Joe Biden has addressed the issue at an event in North Carolina.
As a nation, this is not hyperbole, as a nation we owe these families more than our prayers. We owe them action. You know, we have to do more to stop this gun violence, of ripping communities apart, ripping apart the soul of this nation. To protect our children so they learn how to read and write instead of duck and cover in the classroom. You know, we need to act. These are weapons of war.
We'll talk about that later in the program, but we begin with the Trump investigation. Joining me here in Washington, D.C. is Eleanor Clift. She is a political columnist with the Daily Beast. With us, too, from Florida is Eric Bolling. He is the host of The Balance on Newsmax TV. Also joining the discussion is Douglas Sloan. He's a principal and senior political analyst at National Capital Strategy Group. And with us, too, from Wilmington, Delaware, is Brandon Bryce. He is a columnist and host of the conservative radio talk show, The Bryce is Right. Welcome all of you to the show. Douglas, let me start with you. Still no Trump indictment. It's been a week since Trump said he was going to be arrested. And now there's reporting from CNN that it doesn't look like anything's going to happen this week. Is there anything we can read into this other than the wheels of justice kind of move rather slowly?
I think that's exactly it. DA Alvin Bragg has made it very clear that his case will not be hurried. He's being very cautious in terms of ensuring that all the evidence is brought to the fore. And as he stated earlier, he doesn't want, he will not allow, rather, Trump to dictate the terms or the timeline of his case. And this is historic. We're talking about a former U.S. president being indicted on numerous charges in Florida, New York, DOJ, and in Georgia. So each attorney general, U.S. attorney, district attorney has to be very cautious and deliberate in terms of bringing this evidence forward to the grand juries, to the respective grand juries, to ensure that after all this hullabaloo, that an indictment will be forthcoming. So he's taking his time. He's not going to be pressured by Trump or the press. And we're just going to have to be patient and wait for everything to play out.
Eric, Trump and his supporters continue to claim that this is a witch hunt. In fact, the former president said that at a rally in Waco this weekend, in Waco, Texas. Let's listen to what he had to say.
When this election is over, I will be the president of the United States. You will be vindicated and proud, and the thugs and criminals who are corrupting our justice system will be defeated, discredited, and totally disgraced. That's what's happening.
Eric, talk to us about his comments and also the symbolism of holding this in Waco right in the middle of the 30th anniversary of that big standoff between the Branch Davidians and federal authorities.
Yeah, I think a lot of those on the left like to call it the Trump Davidians because they can appear more cult-like than supporters, I guess. But I'd like to address what Doug had said. I don't think Alvin Bragg has a case. I mean, it's rare that when you're trying to get a grand jury to indict someone that you bring back a witness a second time. There's some evidence that some 600 pages of exculpatory evidence that may have been excluded from the grand jury. Look, this doesn't, your star witness is a convicted felon who's already admitted he's a liar and also said he was never paid by the Trump organization, which they would need to convict. And the star, I guess, victim is Stormy Daniels, who said she never had an affair with him. This is really a witch hunt. It is a joke. Listen, I'm not saying that the guy doesn't have issues on some of the other accusations, but as for this one, this is Alvin Bragg hat-tipping the leftist base and also George Soros spent $500,000 getting Alvin Bragg elected. Soros despises Donald Trump. This should not, there's no way we should use our justice system to go after political opponents, and that seems to be what's going on here.
Eleanor, I want to, maybe you want to comment on that, but first I want to ask you about Waco, because I noticed that he kind of sidestepped that issue. It is rather symbolic to the far right, though. The Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys, we do know that Timothy McVeigh invoked it when the Murrah building was bombed in Oklahoma City, the worst domestic terrorism attack in the United States, where a number of people were killed. There was a reporter at the rally who says that Trump wanting to talk about these things shows a willingness to take the country to a dark place. The fact that he hosted this in Waco. If there is an indictment or more than one indictment, potentially more than those, how dark can it get, and do you agree with that?
Well, I don't think we'd be talking about a potential indictment in New York as though it's going to happen any day if Donald Trump hadn't put it out on Truth Social last week that he expected to be arrested on Tuesday. Turns out he had no knowledge of this, and that might just have been a kind of a test to see how he could incentivize his base. Not many people showed up. There were a couple of lone people with signs in New York and at Mar-a-Lago. But the rally in Waco is, again, it's aimed to send the message to a portion of America that you can kind of trace it to the Branch Davidian protest. And there was also a standoff in Idaho of a gentleman who was protesting, federal involvement in public lands. He didn't want to pay any fees. So I don't. Whether you can call these people, some operate under the libertarian label, patriotic movements. They've gotten infused with a sense of violence over the years, and it feels as though Trump is trying to tap into that. Should he be indicted, he wants this portion of America to rise up and to say this is completely unfair and this is stealing our democracy. I think people are getting a little bit wise to Donald Trump, however, and the high-profile trial in New York about Fox and the lies they spread. So Trump may not be able to mobilize the base the way he thinks he. So I'm not looking ahead to the dark days of America like you just suggested.
Well, Brandon, let me get back to the grand jury in New York and kind of to what Eric was talking about, because there are some questions about whether or not there can be a conviction in this case. New York Times writing in Tuesday's edition, while the facts are dramatic, the case against Mr. Trump could hinge on an untested legal theory. A conviction is far from assured. The Times also going on to point out that this is going to be a low-level felony with a maximum sentence of 4 years. There's no guarantee that there will be any prison sentence at all. So how do you see this shaking out?
It's interesting. On the one hand, this DA has nothing. And the challenge with that is not only listen, I understand the politics of this, but number one, the American people, they said he had, it was Russian collusion. They had nothing. Then they said, well, January 6th was going to be the end. It was going to take the president down. They had nothing. So now you have a situation where you have a DA who was anti-Trump from the start. You had an attorney general, Tish James, who was anti-Trump from the start. And these are the people that are prosecuting the case. Off the back, it's a biased case. And the challenge with that is what they're doing, what the media is actually doing, is they're strengthening his presidency and his candidacy for another presidential run. Just imagine, this is the same guy that said, hey, on Tuesday, they're coming after me. He told the press this. The press follows Trump. Believe it or not, the more that they hit this guy, and the press still hasn't understand this, the more that they hit this guy, the stronger his brand becomes. Now, the issue with that is not are Republicans on board, but are the independents going to be swayed by this nonsense, whatever you want to call it? That's who the decision maker is. But right now, the more they push, the stronger the president's brand becomes in 2024.
Okay, Eleanor, you're a member of the press, so I want to give you a chance to respond to what he just said.
I think the press is reporting the news, and the press is trying very hard not to give Trump all the airtime that he would demand. C-SPAN had his rally on the other night. I don't think Fox even carried it. So you got to report the news. If this turns out to be an indictment and he says it's it's all a hoax, and people are inspired to vote for him. Maybe it will help him get the nomination, but I don't think you can win this country with that message. It's a message that appeals to a minority of a minority, and there's no way it's going to win over independents. You're not going to find people out there who didn't vote for Trump before who are going to say, oh, now that he's been indicted, he's got my vote. And politics is supposed to be a subject of addition, not subtraction. I think he's playing a game of subtraction here.
Douglas, let me ask you about while the waiting game in Manhattan continuing, we are seeing movement, though, on the federal level. Today, a judge ordering former Vice President Mike Pence that he will have to testify before a grand jury looking into the efforts to overturn the 2020 election. This comes on the heels of a similar action towards Mark Meadows, the former chief of staff, and other senior officials in the Trump administration. And also his attorney, Evan Corcoran, testified before a federal grand jury last week in an unrelated case. Of course, this is a classified documents case. These are even more perilous, one would say, for the former president, correct?
Absolutely. Even if the indictment doesn't come down with Alvin Bragg in Manhattan with the district attorney, you have 3 other pending legal actions in Georgia, in D.C. with January 6th, and in Florida. And that one in Florida is really serious about classified documents. So even with Eric Bolling saying, you know, he didn't think there was anything here, but he said that he thought that there would be something in these other cases. There's just so much that's going against Trump right now. I would disagree with the fact that this is strengthening him. If the person that's running for president, the former president, is under indictment, not just one, but 4 different legal actions in different jurisdictions, and one of them looks very strong. And then in the other one regarding January 6th, they're calling Mike Pence, Mark Meadows in to testify. Politically, this is suicide. Now, we've all seen Trump survive these things before. He's made it against all odds. He's a Teflon Don, so to speak. But I just don't see how this attracts new voters. You have Ron DeSantis out there who looks very clean. He doesn't have a lot of dirt on his suit. He's young. He's articulate. He's able to move forward. I know a lot of Republicans are pushing for him. I don't see how Trump is able to rise above all of this politically. I think that being under indictment while running for president really would be a death knell for him. Of course, he surprised us before, but I just don't see how you get out from under all of these different indictments that are forthcoming.
Eric, I want to give you a chance to respond to that, but let me first frame the question this way. We know, or at least the appearance is there, that the base is firmly behind Trump, and yet some senators did speak out because Trump tended to downplay what happened on January 6th. We saw senators like John Cornyn, John Thune, Lindsey Graham from the Republican Party all calling him out on this. And Cornyn saying, you know, he should skip relitigating grievances in the past and focus on his vision for the future, which is what most normal candidates do. Do you see any shift coming from Trump on that regard?
Sure. So allow me just, Doug, I said there may be other issues. There are other lawsuits that may or may not rise to the level. I don't see any individual one of these lawsuits rising to a point where you're going to get what the left so dearly wants, a conviction of Donald Trump and maybe a perp walk in some jail time. None of these things rise to that level. There's no smoking gun. That doubtful is going to happen. What is happening here is you're setting up, you could call it a Fox primary, you could call it a GOP, unofficial primary. Ron DeSantis hasn't even announced he's going to run for president yet. I had him on the show last week. First time it was a non-Fox, non-Rupert Murdoch-owned media interview. He didn't announce, but I will tell you, he does have a groundswell of support because he is the conservative, but he's the non-Trump conservative. What's happening is the media is loving this because you're bifurcating the conservative vote. You're bifurcating the GOP vote. You have a very loud and vocal Trump who thinks he's going to do what he did in 2016. He's going to mobilize the base. Mike, I don't think the base is firmly behind Donald Trump. I think the MAGA base is firmly behind Donald Trump, but there are a whole lot of Republican voters who held their nose and voted for Trump just so they didn't have to have Hillary Clinton. it's going to be a bloodbath on the right, because Trump already hitting DeSantis with things like Meatball Ron, Ron DeSanctimonious, Ron Dukakis. Trump is going after him hard already. He hasn't even announced yet. It will be a bloodbath on the right coming. Stay tuned, folks. This is going to be a wild 18 months.
You know, let's shift our conversation, because I do want to spend some time on what happened in Nashville. And Eleanor, I'd like to start with you. Another major story, 3 9-year-old children along with 3 adults and the shooter killed in this latest mass shooting. And, you know, these mass shootings have become so common that a woman on vacation in Tennessee who had survived a mass shooting went up to the cameras and the microphones yesterday and appealed to stop the nonsense. Let's listen to what she had to say.
I'm from Highland Park, Illinois. My son and I survived a mass shooting over the summer. I am in Tennessee on a family vacation with my son, visiting my sister-in-law. I have been lobbying in D.C. since we survived a mass shooting in July. I have met with over 130 lawmakers. How is this still happening? How are our children still dying, and why are we failing them?
You know, you would think that that would be rare, and yet one of the Nashville reporters who was on the air live talking about the mass shooting reflected on the mass shooting that she survived as a kid growing up in Alabama back in 2010. These are becoming so commonplace. There's been, I think, somewhere in the neighborhood of 130 mass shootings in the U.S. so far this year. What's going on here?
That's right. With mass defined, I think, is 3 or 4 or more. It's too many guns. We have weapons of war on the streets, and they're accessible to anybody. People, you don't have to be, you don't have to pass a test. You can get a weapon. Anybody can get a weapon, and state legislatures are passing laws that make it easier to carry. Concealed carry, unconcealed carry. I mean, we are awash in weapons and weapons of war. There should really be no question that, I mean, we don't allow people to, you know, buy their own missiles. So they shouldn't have access to weapons that were made to fight in the jungles of Vietnam. Starting with that. Secondly, we should regulate guns the way we regulate cars. We don't let anybody drive a car unless they take a lesson, they register. You have to pay fees every year or two. So this is what we need to do. We're not doing it because lawmakers are terrified of the gun lobby, and the gun lobby has a chokehold on members of Congress. And so you have, 80, 90% of people want something done about guns. They want assault weapons off the streets, and you can't get votes in Congress. So I keep hoping every time this happens, this is the one that's going to be the tipping point. And, there's a frustration among gun safety advocates that President Obama, he's not fixing this because he's not trying hard enough. Well, President Obama tried very hard too, and he couldn't even get legislation passed after 26 first graders were killed in Sandy Hook 10 years ago. So this is the public, like that, the woman who just spoke out there. I mean, she speaks for everybody. And as more people are worried about sending their kids to school, and you hear conversations, schools are soft targets, and are we going to harden the schools, and where's the money for that going to come from? It is a sick conversation. We need to do what other countries have done, including Australia, including the UK. We need to dry up the culture of gun violence in this country. And I'm looking for an evangelist on the issue, or a lot of evangelists who are going to stand up and at least vote on assault weapons. So make the Republicans, and some Democrats too, make them own their vote. Make them own a yes, keep assault weapons out there. Let the public see, who's behind the inactivity on Capitol Hill. I hope that's what's coming.
Well, Brandon, these mass shootings obviously ignite a lot of debate here in the United States, very little action. But I will say last year there was a bipartisan measure, the Safer Communities Act. It did pass. It was the first major gun safety legislation passed in Congress in 30 years. Do you think that can be built on, where actually both sides could come together? Because it's so heartbreaking to see these little kids slaughtered when they're just going to school with their books and sitting down in their classroom, and then they're not coming home at the end of the day.
Let me just say, first of all, prayers to the families who lost their children today. It is a tragedy when you have to worry about sending your child to school and hoping that they come back to you in one piece. I watched the video. As tragic as it was, there's a couple things here. Number one, this person legally bought a firearm and had a history of mental health that was unchecked. Second, we continue to talk about gun violence, which is important, but we never talk about public health and mental health. And one of the things is, according to the article and according to what the news is saying, this person had a consistent history for the last few weeks of mental health and derangement that no one addressed. And now this happened and we're saying, oh, it's gun violence. Yes, it is gun violence, but we have failed in America, both sides, bipartisan, to have a serious conversation on mental health in this country. And as I said last time, we had another incident on the show, I said, if we continue to push this, kick this can down the hall, we're going to continue to have these issues. Mental health is a must. And until our children get it, it doesn't matter who you are. We're going to continue to see these issues until Congress takes mental health seriously. And even the buying and selling and purchasing of firearms, looking into the backgrounds of these consumers.
Brandon, that's a good point. I hear Republicans, though, in the past have brought up mental health, but I don't ever see them introducing legislation aimed at providing more funding for mental health. I mean, I just don't see that. I mean, maybe I'm missing it. Is that something they should be doing?
Absolutely. I mean, any time, and I actually agree with my colleague, probably one time I will agree with her. Any time that it is easier to buy a car than to purchase a firearm, there's a problem in this country. And the bigger part of that is not only talking about legislation of how do we keep people safe, but also how do we address the issues when people notice issues of people or bizarre behavior, to report it, to be tracked, to monitor these things before tragedies continue to happen like this.
Douglas, Brandon's saying we need to concentrate on mental health, and Eleanor saying something's got to be done about the guns. She did bring up Australia, and it is worth mentioning that there was a mass shooting there in 1995. 35 people were killed, 23 wounded. It was Port Arthur in Australia the next year. Legislation passed, gun restrictions. There hasn't been a mass shooting since. I'm sure they still have mental health issues in Australia, but they don't have issues with people running around with assault weapons shooting up schools.
Exactly. And one of the main problems of Brandon's position there is that the United States is not an outlier for mental health issues. We do not have any more crazy people than any other First Nation or civilized nation in the world, or for that matter, any nation in the world. The mental health problems of citizens around the world are pretty much at the same level. So it's not so much a mental health issue, it's having easy access to weapons of mass destruction issue. Like you pointed out, in Australia, when they had their school shooting, they took away all the guns. They haven't had a school shooting since. Canada, which is in North America, our neighbors to the north, have had 11 school shootings in the country's history. We had 288 just in a 10-year span, 376 since Columbine. We have to address the main issue of guns. And I think the number is something like 75% of even NRA members believe that there should be criminal background checks and stronger red flag laws. The problem is elected Republicans in Congress are not listening to their constituents. Everybody seems to want stronger gun laws. We used to have a ban on assault rifles. After it sunsetted during the Bush administration, the number of crimes committed with assault rifles, AR-15s, went through the roof. It increased by 243%. So it's not just a mental health issue, it's allowing those people with mental health issues easy access to these weapons of mass destruction. That's where we have the problem. If the problem is the people, you can't allow the people to have access to these guns. And I'll say another thing, unfortunately, the way mental health issues come about, it can happen to almost anyone. Anyone at any given time can suffer a mental health crisis. Now, of course, some people are much more prone to have these type of mental health issues. And some people go their whole lives without mental health issues. I assume that most people go their whole lives without mental health issues. But you never know who it could strike. Some people have lived their lives for many years, no problems, and then suddenly have a mental health crisis, and they have been a responsible gun owner for all their lives, and suddenly they have an AR-15, they have a 9mm with an extended clip, and they go shoot up a school. We have to do something about easy access to these weapons of mass destruction. We're talking about closing the gun show loophole, criminalizing straw purchases, strengthening these red flag laws, banning assault rifles. If we want to keep our children safe, if we want to keep our citizens safe, we have to move forward on some of these common sense gun control measures.
Eric, let me ask you about this, because some people were asking this question today, and I want to give you a chance to talk about it. A lot of folks are saying, look, how is it Republicans are okay with banning books in schools, but they won't ban assault weapons?
These arguments are asinine. I'm listening to Eleanor and Doug, who clearly have no idea what an assault weapon is. We don't have assault weapons on the streets. An AR-15 is not an assault rifle. It's an Armalite rifle. It's a one bullet is triggered. We have 350
It doesn't really matter. That's
firearms. Guys, I've been listening to this bull ass for the last 10 minutes. You guys don't even know what you're talking about, nor does Joe Biden for that matter. You don't even know what you're talking about. 350. May I or no?
I mean, you're getting into semantics, and children are dying. You're saying, "Oh, that's Armalite."
Okay.
If you don't want to hear, if you don't want to hear,
Doug, just give Eric a chance to respond. Eric.
For good God's sake, there's 350 million firearms in the country. Bad guys have a lot of freaking guns. The left wants to take guns out of law-abiding citizens' hands. I can't imagine not owning a gun with what's going on the streets. They want to pull cops off the streets, defund police, crime's running rampant. And you want to say, as a law-abiding citizen, I don't have a right to get a gun? You guys are nuts. Assault weapons are not on the streets. They've been banned. They're not here. There's no automatic weapons legal on the streets. If they find one, they pull it. So your thought that somehow if you stop selling guns right now, the world's going to be safer, America's going to be safer, you're out of your mind.
All right, I'm sorry, we've run out of time, Eric. We're going to have to leave it there. Douglas, I apologize. We've run out of time. I'd give you a chance to respond, but we just don't have any. We're going to have to leave it there. I'm Mike Walter in Washington, D.C. Thanks so much for watching another issue of The Eats.
The nature of business is to bring value. Business activities in Europe, Asia, and the U.S. reach consumers globally. Trade, manufacturing, energy, high-tech, real estate, consumption. We give an expanded view on global business and how it covers, influences, or relates to the whole world. Global business, only on CGTN.